I guess I'll just go ahead and explain for those who didn't listen to the first episode, kind of how the
Sure.
political system works. So you've got a parliament of 89 seats. 39 of those seats are proportional. The 50 other seats are based off of winning or losing districts. You can actually see if you look at the election results as they came out. First, what was done was the one proportional election where the NPCs voted, and then that allowed us to delegate seats accordingly in proportion to how they voted. And then for the districts, there's a 2-round system. So there's a first round. All the other candidates are eliminated except for the winning 2. And then there's another election. And of those 2, the one that wins the district. And they therefore get a seat for a district. Each district gets 1 seat.
It's a good explanation. That's probably more efficient than I could have put it.
Thank you, thank you. I'm looking at the 39 proportional seats here, and you can't at all tell that the DPP is going to get as many, or the CDP is going to get as many. Things seem a little bit even, but then you'd go to the districts, and obviously there's a huge rate of winning for both those parties.
Well, yeah, for the proportional seats, what I have is the highest averages method. It's biased towards small parties, because obviously the electorates are going to be biased towards large parties to some degree. So I wanted to balance out a little bit, so that's why the proportional seats look more even than they should be. It's because they are more even than they should be. Just a little bit of a difference, but I think it helps.
Yeah, it definitely does help for smaller parties particularly. Some people might look at this and see, oh, well, this is just the beginning of an old 2-party system.
I mean, it really is up to the direction people want it in. I think there will probably continue to be 2 parties that are larger than the other ones. But unless you have a very high percentage of the vote, it's really hard to win a majority of seats by yourself, especially since like the biggest party in this election only got 24% of the vote. That's like less than a quarter. Third parties will always be relevant to some degree because I think pretty much every government will be a coalition.
This lean map that you presented, and then we have a round 1 and a round 2 for the district elections. And if I just look at the lean, right, like obviously it's showing areas that are in contention. But if we look in the first round versus the second round, I mean, oh my goodness. Look at Holland, they completely switched, and a lot of places completely switched. You probably look at that as, round 1 versus round 2 voting being effective.
If you look at the composition of the votes on like the actual overall national vote, if you look at the left versus the right, because you're looking at the party of the center, which is still kind of, it's more on the right, it's closer to the CDP than it is to the DPP. So there's more overall right-wing splitting, so it makes it look like they're doing better in the first round than they really are. And so at the second round, it helps balance it out. Because the thing is, even with my lean map, even though I'm doing the election, like because the actual math is like too complicated for me to do in my head, even going into the election, even I don't know what's going to happen. Every single seat that came in, I did not know what that seat was going to be until I did the math. That was just as new to me as it was to everybody reading the channel, especially after I saw in the first round that Rosala was CDP plus 13 and I had it as safe center, and I was like kind of freaked out about that. But then in the second round it was EC plus 25 and I was like, oh, okay. So we have the CDP as a plurality here, which means they have this thing from the previous Wugburgia called the formateur, which basically means it's their job to try to form a government. It's their task at the moment. And if they fail, it can become the DPP's task later. But they have a little bit over 24 hours to try to figure something out.
Yeah.
They're 11 seats short of a majority. So, I mean, if we're just looking at the parliament, like obviously it feels like the logical step here is CDP plus center to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like that seems like any other coalition would be weird,
Yeah.
How would that work? If they fail to form a government, the DPP is almost in a worse place.
Well, if you look at the chart, you could easily come out saying Echo and Etho have won, the CDP has won the election. But really, the center has won this election because there really is no viable majority that doesn't include them. So they can really extract huge concessions out of whoever the prime minister's party. BDD said as the election was coming out, he said, "I think I'm going to be the kingmaker." And he is. He's come out on top in this election.
Yeah, I totally see that.
I think this probably won't be good for the centrist minor parties, so like the Federalists and like WET, but I could see this election going well for the right or the left on the extreme ends, because if the DPP makes a bunch of huge concessions, this will probably help workers Wugburgia, because the left wing of the DPP is going to start eroding away for their left options that aren't compromising with them. And the reverse for the CDP, I could see their support erode away to the National Union. So I think
Oh yeah.
there's a possibility for smaller parties to come out on top just because bigger parties look bad compromising on everything. I think it might do us well to look at each party one at a time, left to right, starting with RWW. They're in kind of like a weird spot because they don't really have much of a shot in any of the electorates. They're kind of much more in like the NUF's equivalent position on the left, where like they don't really have a path to any electorate. If Workers Wugburgia grows, they're going to get pushed out on the list seats too, so I don't really know what they can do. I mean, I just don't see a path for them getting more than like a few seats.
One of the things that you had mentioned to me was that Workers Wugburgia has a real chance of winning some districts next time. Especially if we're expecting a center movement. If that's something that happens on the left side, that will really lend itself to Workers Wugburgia. But even if that's not the case, I feel like Workers Wugburgia has a good chance just because, I mean, they had a few very close elections.
Especially also if we look at the starting random generation that I did to give everybody like a random vote count. Some parties were hurt or benefit more than others just by randomness. And I would definitely put Workers Wugburgia on the hurt side. They have room to improve.
It's worth pointing out that, you know, there is that 43% of parliament that is proportional, and for a lot of small parties, that's the battleground that you start in. Workers Wugburgia is on the high end of that, and that's your first battleground. Once you get above a certain amount in those 39 seats, then you can start worrying about districts. The Federalist Party, what are their prospects?
They kind of had the opposite effect to Workers Wugburgia. They got very lucky in the RNG. They do have some prospects in a few electorates, but they're not going to get any of those in the near future, especially since they're at a high point. If I was Canada, I would look much more towards making sure you don't lose seats. But I think that's a bigger concern, especially since this government doesn't really involve them very much. They're kind of like populist and like sort of economically leftist, but like sort of socially center to center right. So they're in kind of like a very weird demographic position. They don't have an obvious heel to the left or the right. They're kind of both of them at the same time. They got some like syncretism. They could play it a lot of ways.
I guess moving up, we've got the Wugburgia Europe Together Party.
Yeah, I think like Workers Wugburgia, they're in a good position. They have room for improvement. They got kind of screwed over a little bit by the random generation, so they definitely have space to improve and get a second or even a third list seat. They have 3 members who are all decently active, so I could definitely see them pushing the campaigning thing quite hard. So I think they have places to go, where the center goes after the right to try to pull away support. WET goes after the left to try to pull away support. I could see that happening. There are also EU elections eventually, and I think that could be a good position for them.
The No Yamano Party.
They got a little lucky with the RNG because like they could have easily gotten 1 seat, but they just managed to get 2 seats because they're an ethnic minority party. I could definitely see them, despite being a very small party, actually winning a couple of electorates. It's because even more so than some of the other parties, their votes are very concentrated in like 5 or 6 districts.
We should just move on to the changes that you made, because there's just a few of those, and people are probably wondering, you know, how are these going to affect the future elections?
I'm being a little more open with trying to get people to be MPs like as easily as possible, kind of in the vein of what you were talking about last night.
Yeah.
Even though, he came on after the elections happened, he's in the CDP, he's ready to participate, he was just gone. I think before our conversation, I would have said, you weren't standing, so you just gotta wait your turn. But I told him, I'll just give you NPC slot on the list. You can just have that. Portal and Nachi were both standing in electorates and they both lost. So I'm letting them sit as list MPs regardless. Because in that same way, I think this is kind of what you were trying to tell me yesterday was like, that's not really a good reason to sort of block them out of voting.
Yeah, especially when their party does have those seats.
We need to make sure that people are in the parliament and able to do things.
Yeah.
I'm kind of out of time here. Like in a couple of
Yeah.
minutes, I'm going to have to go. So if we want to wrap up here.
Sure. We can just end it here.